Well, hey, my name is Mark Artrip, and I am a pastor at Movement Church on the west side of Columbus, Ohio, in a town called Hilliard. I have grown up in the Charis Fellowship. I grew up at Rittman Grace Church up in Northeast Ohio, and from there went out to Grace College and Grace Seminary. I met my wife Kristen on Operation Barnabas, and so I've earned my share of Grace Brethren and Charis Fellowship stripes. Movement Church is a church that we planted in 2012, and with a heart to plant more churches, we planted Three Creeks Church in 2017, and just recently we sent another church called Contrast Church in 2020. And I think what I have in common with everyone that would be taking this boot camp, watching this process, seeing this video, whether you're doing a plant, whether you're doing a revitalization, a restart, whether you're in a moment of pivoting or shifting with your church, and whether you're looking at the future, I think that we all have this in common, that we love to start new things, and we love to start things from scratch in some way and see them take on new life. And so today I want to talk to us about exactly what our footprint is as a church. I think that most churches have a personality. Most of them have a DNA, a vibe, if you will. And I think it's important as you're working with a church and with an organization to know what your footprint is. Some churches, unfortunately, really have no footprint. They have no impact, or they realize that that's faded over time. And so it might be that they've gotten inward focused. It might be that they've just been trying to keep the lights on and get a new parking lot for a while. But it might be that they've used their outreach-minded muscles once upon a time, but haven't really used them in a while, and so they've seen some atrophy. And so I think it's important first for us to think about the church that's in your mind, the church that's in your heart, the church that you're dreaming to the future. What is the footprint, and what will be the footprint of that church? Most of you are familiar with and probably have seen our materials even leading up to this, of the strategic planning model that Assist works with. We want to know who you are, who you're going to reach, how you're going to reach them, why you're going to reach them, and where. And so as we've already kind of clarified who we're going to be, who we're going to reach, and how we're going to reach them, we want to talk about that why. But more specifically, we want to talk about your purpose statement. Why your church exists, why your movement exists, why your organization exists, is to fulfill your purpose. And so you have to ask yourself, what is our purpose? After you know that, you can decide the best way to hit the bullseye, and you can answer the other questions. And so I want to ask you, what is your purpose? The first thing that you might want to ask is, what is the purpose of the local church? Well, purpose is not our strategy. Purpose is why we exist. Strategy is the method that helps us accomplish it, and strategy and methodology and systems help us go after people. But the reality is that those things can change. And here's an example. I love music. I've loved to listen to music all of my life, and here's all the different ways that I've listened to music over the course of my life. I remember every day when I was young and it was nap time, my mom would lay us down on a bed there, sometimes the living room floor, and she would put on some records. And we would listen to music, and sometimes they'd skip, but I loved music, and we would listen to records. Now, when we went to my grandma's house on Thursday mornings, and we rode in her Ford Granada, some of you know what that is, some of you won't, we would find the 8-track tapes that she had left over from high school, and we would pop those in the 8-track player, and we would listen to music in that way. And so I've listened to records, I've listened to 8-tracks. When I was young, I bought all my DC Talk albums on cassette tape, and Audio Adrenaline and Other People. And then I remember the first time I got a CD player in 8th grade, and I would do my algebra homework listening to that CD. And then I remember when I got to college, and suddenly I had my first Mac laptop, and I had to take all my hundreds of CDs and import them into my iTunes library. And then I remember just what seems like 4 or 5 years ago, I finally had to admit that MP3 library was irrelevant, because why would I just want those songs when I could pay a small monthly fee and have access to basically every song ever with Spotify? So I love music. That was the purpose I was going for, and how I went after that could change and could morph. And so if the purpose is to listen to music, then I figure out how to make that happen once I know what I want to do and what's in my heart. And so you might want to ask yourself, what's the purpose of our church? What's the purpose of the church? Well, the purpose of the church is to proclaim the fullness of God Ephesians 1 tells us that. The church proclaims the wisdom of God. Ephesians 3 tells us that. The church is God's plan to display his power and glory. Ephesians 3 at the end tells us that. And the church is where God gifts and grows his people. We see that in Ephesians 4. And the church is the bride of Christ and the eternal object of the Lord's affection. We see that in Ephesians 5. And so we know the general purpose of the church. The church and the purpose of the church is to glorify God. And that purpose answers why we exist. Our purpose is to glorify God. Our filter is to glorify God. Our statement is to glorify God. But we need to clarify that purpose. We need to inspire people. We need to draw them into something. Pull them into our vibe. Pull them into our DNA. Pull them into who we are and let them catch that and want to run after it themselves. We need to focus our people. We need to steer our people. We need to motivate our people with this statement. We need to let them know that this is a valuable purpose. And this statement will be an asset in aligning them with our purpose. And this is the statement, let's be honest, we've all heard church planners say this. This is the statement that's going to make our people want to charge the gates of hell with a water gun. Yeah, that's not theologically accurate, and honestly, it's a terrible idea, but you understand the imagery. Our purpose should make them say, this is why we exist, this is who we are, this is who we want to be, and this is where we're going, let's go. And so you might want to look at some other passages like the Great Commandment, Matthew 22, 37 to 40. Jesus replied, you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all of your soul, and all of your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. A second is equally important. Love your neighbor as yourself. The entire law and all the demands of the prophets are based on these two commandments. Some people would narrow that down to say that the church's job is to love God and love people. Some people look at the Great Commission. Therefore, go and make disciples, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Teach these new disciples to obey all the commands I've given you. And be sure of this, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. These are statements that we know. These are statements that are the bedrock, the foundation. But we still need that purpose statement that draws us in, that pulls us, that casts vision, that pushes us forward and lets us know why we exist. And so we need to simplify those statements and those calls to purpose. Why do we exist? What is our purpose? What is our common language? What is our rallying cry? Well, here's what it is for our church. And I'm by no means saying that my church is perfect. I'm very aware that my church is not perfect. But the language that we chose is this. We say that we want to be a movement of people finding their way back to God. The name of our church is Movement Church, and we want to be a movement of people finding their way back to God. Now, I once had someone say, that sounds kind of new age spiritually. And I said, well, let me read you the verses where it came from. And it's out of 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 19. It says this, for God was in Christ reconciling the world to himself, no longer counting people's sins against them. And he gave us this wonderful message of reconciliation. So we are Christ's ambassadors. God is making his appeal through us. We speak for Christ when we plead, come back to God. For God made Christ, who never sinned, to be the offering for our sin, so that we could be made right with God through Christ. We were made in the image of God. Sin entered our lives and we walked away from God. But he sent his one and only Son, Jesus, who through his finished work on the cross could plead, come back to God, come back to where you were supposed to be, come back home as prodigal sons, come back to God. And so we say that we want to be a movement of people finding their way back to God. The word movement communicates simple language that fits our vibe. The word movement means intentional and contagious. That's what we want to be with the gospel. We want to be intentional and contagious with saying, you can find your way back to God here. Now that can be a two-part thing, and where people use this language often. That's a one-time decision to trust Jesus, and that's continual sacrifices and small steps of ways that you're saying, I want to surrender this part of my life to God, and I want to surrender this part of my life to God. And so I want you to ask, what is that statement for you? Does it make you wake up in the morning? What's that statement for you? Does it make you jump out of bed and make your feet run towards your purpose? What is your purpose? Why do you exist? And how will that become your rallying cry that embodies who you are and embodies your language? What's your purpose? What's your mission? What's the language that makes sense? And think about this. Is your language inward facing or outward facing? We say one small thing that some people wouldn't catch, but we say we're a movement of people finding their way back to God. We don't say a movement of people finding our way back to God, because that's exclusive and that puts other people on the outside. Sometimes little nuances and little words like that can matter. But we say we're a movement of people finding their way back to God, which means that people can find Jesus and they can be a part of our culture where we're going to take continuous, small, sacrificial steps together. And I'd be lying if I said that we didn't choose the word movement because we want to contribute to our fellowship being a movement and to us being a movement. We want to continually plant life-giving churches. And so our name, our purpose statement, and the language we use draws people into that and motivates people into that so that they can see where we're going and what we're doing. And so the value of this statement, the benefit of this statement is going to be that it calls people into your purpose, invites them into your purpose, rallies them into your purpose, and sends them out. What is your purpose? Why do you exist? And how can you embody all of that in a statement that will help you be the church that God is calling you to be?